Hi, I'm Shaking Gaming. In this video I'm going to go over 100 games I've played. Sort of a nostalgia trip back to the old times and all the way up to the present. I have picked all those I remembered that I'm sure that I have played for more than 10 hours. Some of them I've played quite a lot more, but we'll get back to that. But Hi, I'm Shaking Gaming. I've played a lot of games through the times. In this video I'm going to take a nostalgia trip back in time, starting with the first games that I played and all the way up to 2019 is the last released game that I've played. All in all, 100 games that I'm going to talk you through. It's going to be a long one. This will be part 1. Before I start on the first games, I want to mention this little baby, the Commodore 64, released in 1982. This was what we had to play in back in the days. There was something prior to that, Atari for example, but I've played so little on that I probably don't have 10 hours playtime on each of the games I played. So I decided to start with the Commodore 64. I never had one of these myself, so it was only at friends I played. To get data into the Commodore 64, you had to use some sort of input. You could either use the tape drive or the disk drive. In the beginning, as far as I remember, there was only a tape drive. You simply put a tape in the machine, you pressed play, and then you had to wait for the game to load. And that could take quite a while. Some games loaded the game itself, and then you had to load in between stages in the game. Other games you had to load the entire game with all the stages first. It could take up to 20 minutes or more just to load the game. When the disk drive came later, it became a lot faster, but still, loading times sucked. Of course, I can't remember when I played these games, but I have looked up the release dates on each game and listed them by release year. A lot of these old games have very poor screenshots that I've found. Some of them part due to the resolution of the screens back then and the games that was actually able to run these resolutions. But I tried to find the best screenshots I could. This is from Impossible Mission from 1984. I didn't like the game, but I know I played it a lot because there wasn't a lot of games back then. So basically you had to solve a lot of puzzles in a lot of stages. I never cleared this. And it was tedious and, in my opinion, boring. Number 2, that's also from 1984, is Boulder Dash. If you look closely, there's a little guy up here. That was your character. And he had to pick up these diamonds in the stages and make it to the end. The end exit was opened when you had picked up all the diamonds. And basically stones rolled downwards and he could just run in the earth. So you ran down, ran to the side. If you stayed there, you would get hit by the stone. They would fall down. So you ran, picked up the diamond, and then you have to pick your route through the course to pick up all the diamonds. And if you weren't careful, you would block diamonds off as well, so you couldn't continue. It was a fun game in my opinion. Number 3 on my list is also from 1984. Summer Games. It was basically Olympics, but I guess that was a trademark on that. So it was summer games. Some of the games were fun. A lot of the games were very, very hard on the joystick because running, for example, you had to go flicker the joystick back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until your wrist got numb. Even though we were kids, it was rough. The running games and in some of the other games, winter games that I come back to later, was also very, very hard on the joystick and on your wrists. Not the best game, but we had a lot of fun with it, especially because it had multiplayer, so you went one at a time and then you competed in all these different games to see who ended up winning the gold medal. Number 4 on the list is also one of these games. It was Winter Games, released in 1985. This was one of my favorite disciplines in the Winter Games, biathlon. You can see closely if you look that he's got a gun on his neck, on his back. The running itself was very tedious again with the back and forth flickering to get the best slide on your skis. But the shooting was fun, I remember. And then you had to maintain your pulse. So you wanted to go fast, but before you ended up at the shooting, you wanted your pulse down because otherwise the crosshair would just go like this. It would be impossible to control. Good game. Defender of the Crown from 1986. It was the first game that I played that had multiple layers. You had a map overview with territories you could conquer. You had sieges like this screenshot, where you had to tear down the enemy walls of the castle before you could start the combat. You could rescue the princess, I remember. There were sword fights. It was an amazing game at the time. It had all these different layers and a very good strategic game. And the graphics, as you can see, top notch. Number 6, International Karate Plus from 1987. It was the first fighting game I played. You had, I don't remember how many moves. Not that many, but a few. And then you could fight. And it was fun. And you could multiplayer. So you could be red and blue together. No, red and white, I think you could play as. And then you could have 1 or 2 extra AIs. I don't know what else to say. It was simple. The gameplay was good. Number 7, Bobble from 1987. Fantastic game. I loved it. And I still have very, very fond memories of it. It had several new game elements not seen before. You were these 1 or 2 dragons, depending on if you play 1 or 2 player, and you had to clear 100 stages. This was one of the very, very tedious games to load on the tape station for the Commodore 64, because it had to load all 100 stages before you could start the game. It would take 20 to 25 minutes, and if there were an error on the last stage loading it, I've tried that, you could just start over again, 20 to 25 minutes, before you're ready for your second try. Number 8, also from 1987, Platoon. It was the first game with a maze and explore and combat at the same time. Might be hard to see because the screenshot is so bad, but you had this soldier walking around in the jungle shooting bad guys. I don't know how good it was. I think it was too hard for me to understand at the moment, or maybe I didn't have enough time to really get into it. But it's on the list. It's the first explore and shoot game I can remember. Number 9, Maniac Mansion, also from 1987. There's even more of those. Must have been a big year in the gaming industry. It was an adventure game. You had to save a girl from the basement of a mad guy's mansion, and it was very hard. It had multiple solutions. It had multiple characters that you could use. I think you could use 3 at a time. And then they had different abilities and different options depending on the NPCs you met. I never completed it. I maybe got halfway through it. It was very, very tough. It was one of those games I played because there wasn't a lot to play and it was something new. Couldn't play the same games all the time. But here you have it. Simple commands you could use. New kit. Walk to, open, close, push, pull, give, read, what is, use. And then you could click on different stuff. For example, there you could put stuff in the microwave. I can't explain this game. As the title said, Maniac Mansion. It was very, very weird. Number 10, Barbarian from 1987 again. Featured a fighting game with swords. I remember you could, if you made the right move and your opponent didn't block, you could chop his head off. It fell to the ground, rolled with an odd sound, and then this tiny gnome or demon or something came in, picked the head up and walked out with it, and you won. It was barbaric. Not a great game in my opinion, but barbaric. This is California Games from 1987 as well. Same series as Winter Games and Summer Games, but California Games was a lot more well made. This is from surfing. You could make various tricks. You had frisbee, rollerblades, roller skates, hacky-sacky ball. It was the same sort of game, but it had a lot of new elements, and it wasn't as tedious with the wrist, with running, as you had in Summer and Winter Games. We played this a lot. Finally done with 1987. This is from Outrun in 1988. Number 12 on the list. I reckon most of you remember this picture or have seen it somewhere. Very iconic. It was the car game at the time. There was no comparison to it. It wasn't very realistic, but it was a car game and we played it a lot. Number 13 on the list is Caveman Olympics or Olympics or something like that. It featured the same Olympics theme as Summer Games, Winter Games, California Games, but in this one you had to compete in stereotype Stone Age disciplines. This one I remember best. You had to make a fire with 2 sticks, rubbing them against each other, and then if your opponent was closer to winning than you knocked him in the head, and then you continued. There was also dinosaur riding and I think throw the wife or something. It wasn't as great as the others, definitely not, but it had better graphics and it had fun. And that was new to this genre. Number 14, Rick Dangerous from 1989. Another adventure explore game where you played with this little guy that could throw dynamite. I don't really remember much else from it, but we did play it. Was it good or not? I don't actually remember. but we definitely played it more than 10 hours, so here it is. Number 15, The Last Ninja from 1987. Yes, I know I messed up in the sorting of the years, but here it is anyway. A very, very hard fighting, exploring adventure game. I don't think I ever cleared second stage. That was as hard as it was. You had to unlock via some puzzles various areas, and there were some fights that was near impossible to manage, I remember. Yeah, not much else to say. It was something new again. The graphics were great, as you can see. And this concludes the Commodore 64 list. So next up is Amiga 500. The Amiga 500 was released in 1987. It was a massive upgrade to graphics. We couldn't believe how pretty everything looked, even though you will still think it looks crap compared to nowadays. But it was a major step up, and it had its own disk station. So games ran a lot quicker. Turning it on, it showed a big disk picture on the screen. Put a disk in on. Until you did that, you couldn't do anything. So pick the right game, flick it in the machine, and you could play rather quickly, actually. The first game I remember from the Amiga 500, according to release dates, is Operation Wolf from 1988. I can't believe that these games were released prior to some of the games I played on the Commodore 64. The graphics difference is so big. It was a sliding shooting game, so the screen just moved. You didn't have to move yourself, and then you had to shoot all these various people and objects. You know, the kind of game. But it was the first I tried of this kind. And it was so good compared to anything else I tried at that time. One of my favorite Amiga games for sure. Number 17 from 1988, The Great Giana Sisters. It's basically just a Mario clone, and I think they had some lawsuits against them because it was basically just a rip-off. I wasn't fan of the game, but we played it a lot again because my friends thought it was good, and I didn't have an Amiga either, just as the Commodore 64, so I had to rely on playing at friends. Number 18, North and South from 1989. This was an epic game. It was so good in multiplayer. You had the North and the South, and then you fight it over different territories. You could pick up loot on the map, I think. There was some railroads and Indians that could interfere. But the main part of the game were these battles where you entered with a cannon, 3 cavalries, and 6 infantry. And you could only move one of them at a time, control one at a time. The horses could rip your opponent apart just using them. The cannon could basically the same. The infantry was probably the hardest to use, but it was very, very strategic, these fights, and it had great gameplay, I remember. It was all about these fights. The cannon could shoot all the way to the end. You had to hold the button as long as you wanted to, the longer you wanted it to fire. The horses were melee, and I think the infantry could shoot to around this distance. best game ever released to Amiga, in my opinion. At 19, Golden Axe from 1989. I think a lot of people remember this game. I thought it was great at the time, but looking back at it, it was very simplistic. But I guess it started an era of these kind of games with fighters, a fighting game where you had to move at the same time, pick up loot and fight bosses, and you could ride these weird dragon birdie things and jump and slash. The dwarf was my favorite, and I think most people think he was the best. Strange, bit awkward to control, but first of its kind, in my opinion, in the gameplay style. So, good game, bad game, bit of each. Streetfighter II at number 20, released in 1991. Fighting game. Absolutely the best at the time. And here you also had the beginning of ultimate moves, or whatever you call it, very hard to make moves, which was something new. For example, Chun-Li, I think, could reverse and fly like a helicopter through the air, spinning her legs, which was a hard trick to make. There was a guy shooting fire. I don't remember much more. Grill, my favorite character by far, is the guy on both sides here. Great game. Number 21, Lemmings from 1991 again. The game was about having all these lemmings. They fell out of a gate in the sky, and then you had to walk them to the end of the map without losing too many. It was one of its kind at the moment at puzzle gaming. You could use different abilities varying in each stage. You could dig, you could set a guy to blow up or parachute down, build bridges, all sorts of weird things. If they fell down, if they went into the water, they died. That was a casual game. You could just repeat it as many times as you would, but on the other hand, very challenging. At 22, Walker from 1993. It may not look like much, but this game had amazing graphic. By far the best I had seen when it came out. Nothing was even close. And the sound. It was the first game I could hear that they had actually worked on the sound a lot. We used to put it on the stereo and turn the speakers up real loud because it was so good. The gameplay was simplistic. You moved this walker around and aimed the crosshair at the enemies, and you had to watch your temperature of the gun to not overheat. Not much else to say, but it was so good because finally someone had worked with sound. Instead of just being beep and blop and it. At 23, Worms from 1995. It was supposed to be fun with the worms screaming and when you hit them, and you could use bazookas and hand grenades and stuff to wipe your opponents. But basically it was just a rip-off of a game that is later on the list because it's on the PC list. They tried to make it fun. I never liked it really. and it wasn't new, but I guess most people saw this as a new type of game because they hadn't seen the other one, which is 26. Coming back to that in a second. I never really played PlayStation, so this is a one-off, just this single game, and year-wise it doesn't fit in at all, as you can see in the graphics as well. This is from Tekken 3 from 1995. It was a complex fighting game. Best at the time, nothing could compete with this. Great game, but the only one I really have played on the PlayStation and enjoyed. PC coming up with the long list.